Alright guys, so I got some pretty big updates for y'all coming out of Israel because just a couple of days ago, the Houthis in Yemen managed to land a strike inside of the heart of Israel in Tel Aviv. So hear from Haaretz on some of the basics on what's happened, and then I got a couple other updates that I want to give you guys here in regards to Israel. They start off here, saying that the drone strike in Tel Aviv early last Friday signals a new stage in the war, setting it up to be a regional, multi-front conflict. The explosion near the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv killed one man in his apartment and wounded around 10 people hit by shrapnel. They also say that since October 7th, the Tel Aviv area has been the target of many Hamas rockets, but the threat to the center of the country has greatly declined since the army entered the Gaza Strip in late October. They also say that Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has avoided an all-out war so far, hasn't fired south of Lake Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, while the Houthis had only targeted the Eilat area in the far south. So this is some sort of an escalation to some extent, but let's just remind ourselves of a couple of things in terms of what dynamics are currently playing out. We are talking about a massive, serious, legitimate risk of this blowing up into a widespread regional conflict. And the only reason that this is happening is because of what Israel is and has been doing inside of Gaza since October 7th. We are talking about not only now a 9 to 10 month long genocide in Gaza, while they are simultaneously, rapidly and violently expanding their illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. We're also talking about continued escalations, tit for tat, with Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon, and now we are also talking about, if you listen to some of the Israeli cabinet members and ministers inside of Israel, an escalation with the Houthis in Yemen. Now, let's remind ourselves also of why the Houthis are doing what they are doing. The reason that they are trying to impose some sort of a blockade on Israel by attacking some of the shipping lanes around the country, the reason that they would launch this kind of an attack on Tel Aviv is literally 100% because of Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza. If Israel, managed to work out some sort of a ceasefire, or if they halted this genocide, then what the Houthis are doing would stop immediately. So that's at the core of this. You can't even cover this story without understanding that that is the fundamental issue that has to be solved in order for us to, avoid a broader war in the region. But this is the kind of policy that I think many in the Israeli government, including obviously Benjamin Netanyahu himself for his own personal reasons and incentives, this is kind of what he wants. He would prefer that this continues indefinitely. He would prefer that this escalates towards something broader in the region than for this to end peacefully. Because the second that this ends peacefully, whatever that may mean, that also means the end of his political career. This is a man who could potentially end up in jail whenever this all comes to a close. So he has every incentive in the world to escalate this to an incredibly dangerous and deadly situation, more so than it already is right now, which is saying a lot. Now they continue down here. They say still, the dramatic attack in Israel's center got the media going. Some observers in the studios and on social media are demanding both a declaration of war against the forces behind the attack and a bit of a head rolling for the Israelis who failed to activate the air defense systems. They also say that the Houthis have taken responsibility for the attack, declaring that they launched a new drone that they're calling Jaffa. And a spokesperson said that the drone skirted Israeli air defense batteries and that Tel Aviv would now be the main target. So listen, guys, again, exactly what I was just saying, on top of the fact that if Israel wants to open up another front and to go to war with the Houthis, good fucking luck. Good fucking luck. I mean, if a coalition of the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the United States, who waged a years-long, what I think could be accurately classified as a genocidal war on the people of Yemen, if they could not displace the Houthis from power, if Israel can't even displace Hamas from power inside of Gaza, then what exactly makes them think that they could go to war with the Houthis successfully? I mean, it's absolutely insane. The same mistakes from history are continuously being repeated over and over and over again. And again, we're not even talking about history 100 years ago. We're talking about history like 10 years ago. And they're still following in this same exact, pathway. Now, we have a little bit of video here from Suleiman on what exactly this strike looks like. It's a little bit of grainy footage here taken from a TV, but you can see here where the strike ended up landing. Pretty sizable fireball, if you ask me. Again, they say that one person was killed and about 10 others were wounded. And we got some more details here from CNN on what exactly happened. They say a tipping point for Israel appears to have come on Friday when a drone attack was launched on Tel Aviv, killing one Israeli citizen and injuring several others. The attack was claimed by the Houthis, with spokesperson Yahya saying that the operation was performed by a new drone capable of bypassing the enemy's interception systems. He says, "We will continue to strike these targets in response to the enemy's massacres and daily crimes against our brothers in the Gaza Strip, and our operations will only cease when the aggression stops and the siege on the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip is lifted." So again, if you don't want this escalation to happen, if you don't want these kinds of attacks to happen, there you go. You got your answer, right? Now, I'm not saying I'm a big fan of the Houthis or whatever. I'm just saying this is pretty fucking simple. It's really not that complicated. If Israel stops their genocide in Gaza, then this escalation stops. It really is that simple. They continue down here. They say the attack marked the first time that Tel Aviv, Israel's commercial center, has been struck by a drone attack in an attack claimed by the Houthis, and Israeli authorities are investigating the circumstances and potential security failures around the deadly drone blast. The IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said that the military suspects that the drone was an Iranian-made Samad 3 model launched from Yemen, which had been upgraded to extend its range, and a second drone, they say, was intercepted outside of Israeli airspace to the east at around the same time of the attack. And they also say that they're upgrading their patrol and borders and air defense systems. So now we get to this, because Israel, of course, responded to this, I think in a grossly disproportionate manner, which is pretty much textbook for what they always do. So they say, how did Israel respond? Israel's response came a day later when Israeli aircraft hit the Yemeni port of Hodeidah, which is the main port that is capable of facilitating supplies into Yemen, which, keep in mind, again, was already dealing with significant, massive, catastrophic humanitarian issues. So striking this port at a time where the aid that is necessary for civilians in Yemen to barely scrape by was already limited, to strike this port is an attack not just on the Houthis, it's an attack on the people of Yemen. That's what this is. They say the attack, right, which marked the first time that Israel has struck Yemen directly, killed at least 6 people and injured scores more, according to Yemeni officials. The Houthi-run Al Masira TV said that the strikes targeted oil facilities on the port on Yemen's west coast, and Houthi spokesperson Mohammed said that the strikes had also hit civilian targets and a power station that was close by. He slammed what he said was brutal Israeli aggression aimed at the increasing suffering of the people of Yemen and pressuring the group to stop its support of Gaza. They say Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the port was used by Iran to bring arms into Yemen. He said, "The port we attacked is not an innocent port." It's not an innocent port, guys. It was used for military purposes. It was used as an entry port for deadly weapons supplied to the Houthis by Iran in a statement on Saturday. Can we just pause on that for a second? So, by this same logic then, the Houthis, or anybody, should be justified in bombing Israeli ports because they are using those ports, in many circumstances, to import US-made weaponry. Is that the logic that we're going with here? It's okay to strike ports, right? Even if they're desperately needed to bring in aid to starving and battered civilians. It's okay to strike those ports because they're used to import weaponry. Is that the logic that we're going with here? Because again, under that same logic, you would be entirely justified in not only trying to impose a blockade on Israel, but in striking Israeli ports to prevent them from importing Israeli or US-made weapons to Israel that they are using to commit war crimes against civilians in Gaza. I guess that's the logic that we're going with here. They say Netanyahu also said that the operation, which hit targets 1,800 kilometers from Israel's borders, showed that Israel was serious about responding to threats. He says it makes clear to our enemies that there is no place that the long arm of the state of Israel will not reach. So they continue down here. They say, how big of an escalation is this? Neither side have suggested that they are ready to back down. It is not in the Houthi DNA to de-escalate with Israel, according to Charles Lister of the Middle East Institute. They say the Houthi army spokesperson, again, Yahya, said that the Houthis have prepared for a long war with Israel and that Tel Aviv is still not safe. and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned that the blood of Israeli citizens has a price, and that if Israelis are attacked, the results will be identical to that which has been seen in Lebanon and in Gaza. So there you go, guys. I mean, continued tit-for-tat escalation with basically everybody around them. This is what we're heading towards. Because what exactly? Because they insist on continuing with this genocidal war on the people of Gaza? I mean, I've run through the stats so many times that, your mind almost becomes numb hearing it, although it shouldn't be, because these are human beings with lives, with families, etc. But I mean, we're talking about they have destroyed a majority of the buildings in Gaza. They have displaced a vast majority, if not the entirety of the population in Gaza. A vast majority of the people who they have been killing have been innocent men, women, and children. Right? Every single doctor, and we're going to get to an interview here in a minute, that I have seen, even American doctors who have gone over and worked in Gaza, have said that this is the worst thing that they have ever seen in their lifetime. And these are people who go to terrifying, dangerous war zones, right, in order to try to help. And they come back, and they describe the horrific carnage and death and destruction that they see inside of Gaza, and describe how it is incomparable to anything that they've ever seen in their entire careers. We're talking about unprecedented things. We're talking about the entire, destruction of the healthcare system, of the education system inside of Gaza. Playing this genocidal game of musical chairs. Okay, you got to go south to Khan Yunis. Oh, now we're going to invade Khan Yunis. Now you got to go south to Rafah. Oops, we're going to invade Rafah. Go to Al-Mawasi. Oops, we have to bomb there as well. There's never been any safe place in Gaza. They've rendered it unlivable at this point. They are starving the population of Gaza. There's now less aid getting into Gaza now than basically ever. I saw recent estimates saying that there's approximately like 85 to maybe 100 trucks a day getting into Gaza, when experts are estimating that we need at least 1,000 trucks per day just to sustain the population, to keep them from mass death. We are nowhere close to that, guys. We're not even a tenth of the way towards that kind of a goal. And there's no end in sight at this point. Every single time that some sort of a negotiation for a ceasefire comes up, Benjamin Netanyahu is sabotaging it every single step of the way. Now, apparently, according here to CBS News, again, this strike happened on Friday, guys. July 18th, I believe. It is now July 22nd today. And they say here from CBS News, Yemen's Houthi-held port of Hodeidah still ablaze 2 days after Israeli strike. They say firefighting teams on Monday were struggling to contain a massive blaze at Yemen's Hodeidah port, days after a deadly Israeli strike damaged oil storage facilities and endangered aid ships in the harbor, which is in the massive portion of the country controlled by the Iran-backed Houthi rebel movement. Now, another thing that I find hilarious about Western media coverage of the Houthis is they always feel the need to say the Iran-backed Houthis. The Houthis are their own movement, guys. This is not just like a puppet organization of Iran. Do they get support from Iran? Yeah, absolutely. Do they get weapons from Iran? Yeah, absolutely. But are they just like puppets? I mean, if you're going to say Iran-backed Houthi rebel movement, then you should also be saying IDF or US-backed IDF, if you're trying to be, accurate about this, I guess. But of course, this only goes one way. Now, we also have a picture of what the strike at the Hodeidah port in Yemen actually looked like. An unbelievably massive explosion here. A fireball that, again, was apparently ablaze for days. I don't know if at this point it's been put out, but as of yesterday, it certainly hadn't been. So, and again, an unbelievable amount of destruction on the main port for humanitarian aid that's supposed to be getting to the people of Yemen. Now, we also had this statement here from Niku Jafarnia, who works for Human Rights Watch. She said yesterday Israeli forces struck several sites in Hodeidah in Yemen, killing 6+ and injuring over 80 in retaliation for a Houthi drone strike in Tel Aviv that killed 1 civilian. And the Houthis' actions in no way justify this response from Israel, which has caused immense civilian harm, and I think that she is 100% correct. Now again, need to emphasize the point, as even Joe Biden himself, who recently obviously resigned from the 2024 election race, even he said that the U.S. strikes on Yemen, that the U.S. was carrying out in response to the Houthis' blockade of Israel, they said that these strikes on Yemen aren't stopping the Houthi attacks, but the strikes will continue. So, yeah, we're just going to endlessly bomb Yemen even though we know for a fact that it's not deterring anything. It's not working militarily in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it's just hardening their resolve. But we're still going to keep doing the strikes. And that's now where I guess Israel is, in the same exact situation. Now, moving on from that escalation that we just went.
When were you in Gaza?
We also have this here, because, again, as I was just saying, we've had many American doctors who have gone to Gaza to try to help the people there, and they have come back with some absolute horror stories. So here we have this doctor, a Jewish American doctor, by the way, Mark Perlmutter, and he's going to describe some of the stuff that he saw in Gaza. I'll put this on 1.25 speed. Let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this. Absolute nightmare fuel.
End of April for the first couple of weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday Morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Some shootings have been captured on video.
So of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
In 1 week, in one single week in Gaza, this Jewish American doctor, who, as he just said, had spent 30 years trying to give his service in humanitarian disasters and earthquakes and other situations at ground zero and war zones, 30 years of that. And he says, combine all of it, and it does not compare to 1 week of what he saw in Gaza. This is not a new, revelatory story that we're breaking here in terms of the sniper shots. I've covered this, I think, months ago at this point, that we had doctors inside of Gaza who were reporting that children were coming into the hospitals with single sniper bullets to the head or to the chest. They're just murdering children, guys. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's an obvious war crime. You're talking about a sniper, right? Where you're looking down the barrel, you're looking down the scope, and you're looking at a child, and you choose to pull the trigger, in some cases multiple times, to ensure that they're killed, directly in the chest, directly in the head. We're not talking about a security threat. We're not talking about a valid military operation. We are talking about wanton, zero accountability murder at a mass scale that has been going on for 9 fucking months at this point, with no end in sight, no accountability, no pressure from the Biden administration. Nothing whatsoever. This has just been so thoroughly normalized that it's broken my brain to some extent to think that people that I know, that I respect, that I, am around in this country, in the United States of America, that people think that this is normal, that this is acceptable, that this is justifiable in any way, shape, or form. It's not. Imagine if this was your family. Imagine if this was your child. I mean, this is really the stuff of nightmares. It's genuinely unimaginable that we are at this point. I think 10 years down the line, I don't know if it'll take that long, but 10, 15 years down the line, people are going to look back at this, rightfully so, and they're going to recognize this as one of the greatest atrocities in the modern age. It seriously is. Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the most notorious war criminals on the face of the planet. And guess what? He's being invited to come speak to our Congress. I think it's this week, actually. It might be this Wednesday. He's being invited to come speak to our Congress, as he has potential ICC, International Criminal Court, arrest warrants coming down the pipeline. If anything, we should be arresting this man when he steps foot on U.S. soil. In fact, I think we have an obligation to do so. Instead, we're inviting him to speak to the country. It's a fucking disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace. Now, I'll give you some more updates on that here, because we had something from Kamala just recently that actually kind of surprised me on that. But before we get to that, I just want to mention this real quick, because this is nothing insignificant. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which has been overseeing this genocide case against Israel, they just ruled 14-1 and I don't know which country was the one that voted against this, but they say they voted 14-1 that Israel must immediately cease all new settlement activities and remove all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories. They effectively ruled that Israel is, in fact, as I think most people recognize, an apartheid state. Now, when I posted this news on my channel in the community posts area just a couple days ago when it broke, I had many people, I think to some extent justifiably, posting in the comments saying, well, this doesn't really matter. It's non-binding. It's not enforceable. Of course, the ICJ doesn't have a military. They're not going to go invade Israel and force them to do anything. Of course, all of that is true. But you can't just overlook this, guys. This is significant, right? First off, the ICJ, the ICC, these are institutions that typically throughout history have been largely biased in favor of Israel. And we are seeing steps being taken that are absolutely historic. Mostly for the sake of this kind of a ruling gives many other countries around the world the justification, the ability to reference this kind of thing in order to potentially justify down the line sanctions against Israel, or to further isolate Israel, to apply massive international pressure on Israel to not only stop the current genocide, but to actually, achieve some sort of a sustainable peace in the future. So this is important for broader reasons than just the ruling in and of itself. And I don't think that it's something to just gloss over. This is massive, guys. 14-1, the highest court in the world, just ruled effectively that, yes, Israel is an apartheid state. Yes, they are illegally occupying the Palestinian people. They must evacuate the settlements in the occupied West Bank. That is massive. It's massive to have that on paper as a ruling from the ICJ. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning there. Now, to finish off the video here, to talk about Kamala, right? Mamala, as some people have been calling her. Now, I want to make something clear before we get into this. I'm not a fan of Kamala. Don't know if you guys know that. If you're somebody who followed me back on Twitter when I first started covering politics during the 2020 Democratic primary, Kamala Harris was one of possibly my single least favorite candidate in the 2020 Democratic primary. Maybe Michael Bloomberg and Joe Biden would have been below her. But that's probably the only two that would have been below Kamala. She was flip-flopping on Medicare for All. She backed off of that. She has a terrible record as a prosecutor in California. We know her history, right? So I'm no fan of Kamala. Although I do recognize the current situation is kind of interesting with Joe Biden stepping down. Now, part of the reason I think it's interesting is, so we have this article here from the Jerusalem Post. After Biden's endorsement, what has Kamala Harris said about Israel? Now, the reason I bring this up is not to tell you guys that by any stretch of the imagination, Kamala Harris is going to start going out there and saying, free Palestine, Netanyahu is a war criminal, let's lock him up, let's, push back against the Israeli apartheid. I'm not saying any of that. But what I am saying is that I do not think that Kamala Harris, as a candidate or as a potential president, is an ideological Zionist. In fact, I don't even really think that she could describe what that means, okay? She grew up in a different era than Joe Biden did. Joe Biden is still stuck in the 1980s. He is ideologically a Zionist, right? So I think there is a potential window of opportunity. I'm hedging here, right? I'm not hyping her up, but I think there is a potential window of an opportunity there. She called for a ceasefire earlier than Joe Biden. She says she's in favor of a two-state solution, although that basically means nothing coming from the mouth of a U.S. politician. But I think there is a window there where somebody like Kamala Harris, or really most other, generic Democrats, would not be as ideologically committed to doing literally everything that Israel wants them to do, given the current state of the Democratic Party. So, essentially what I'm saying is that I think Kamala Harris would potentially be easier to bully on this issue into a better position. That's what I'm saying. I think that she would be much more amenable, much more easily influenced, in terms of potentially applying some modicum of pressure on Israel to force them into line, right? Now, as a part of what I'm saying here, we just got this update from Prem. Kamala Harris has reportedly declined to preside over the Senate for Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress this week. So this is kind of interesting, guys. We also had this. Of course, he's quote tweeting an article from The Intercept where they say Kamala Harris is less burdened by Biden's disastrous support for Israel's war, sparking some hope in pro-Palestine advocates. Now, again, I'm not trying to overhype it. I'm not trying to say she's going to be a godsend for the Palestinian people. Of course not. But is there daylight between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden when it comes to Israel and Gaza? I think there is. I think there definitely is. So, again, absolute nightmare in terms of this potential escalation with another front of Israel's offensive potentially heading towards Yemen, the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, the continuation of the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, the continuation of an escalation with Hezbollah in the north with no end in sight for any of this. So it's a terrible situation, a nightmare situation. And of course, now we have a fully senile president who I think at this point has kind of admitted as much because he's not running for re-election anymore. He was forced to drop out because of his cognitive decline. And he's not dropping out of the presidency. Right? He's not handing the keys over to Kamala Harris to run the rest of his administration. He's still the president. So he's still technically running the ship in regards to what's going to happen in, the stage between now and January of 2025 when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Middle East policy. And that is honestly terrifying.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying